Hi, I'm BoLSK from Bitter Old Goons Gaming, and welcome to video 3 in our series on restoring and converting an old BurgerTime cabinet using Raspberry Pi and RetroPie. Today we're going to do the controls. The arcade controller is where you're going to find a lot of variety from arcade machine to arcade machine. For example, you can have one player units such as this, or you might have up to 8 players, 8 joysticks on an arcade machine, depending on the old style and the size, or which you might want to custom build for yourself. You may not have a joystick at all. You may have a mechanically mounted machine gun or a rifle or a light gun, much as you would find in Big Buck Hunter or Area 51. You may also have a full bicycle or a sit-down card game. Those are all forms of arcade controls. Now in our specific case, we have a one-player control, and what the original BurgerTime cabinet should have is one button per side for Pepper, and player 1 and player 2. At some point in this arcade cabinet's life, somebody has taken off the BurgerTime overlay. They've drilled through, added this acrylic. They've drilled through to bolt the acrylic in place and also to put this joystick in there, and they've drilled and added second buttons. What we're going to do is fill all those holes to make it look factory new. We're also going to mount our Raspberry Pi underneath here, and that will control the screen, everything we need to. It'll all be built right into this. And we'll add external USB and HDMI ports on the top of the machine for external connectivity to things like a projector. I don't know why we'd want to, but I want to have the option. And also 3 USB ports on the top that allow us to connect external joysticks and external controllers like SNES controllers for that style of emulation. So with that, we're going to get our components out on the table and show you what you might need to restore something like this for yourself. Okay, we've got our controller laid out on the table, and we're going to go through the replacement components, starting with the buttons. We're going to replace the ones on here with Happ style Reyann buttons with a decent mechanical switch. You want to go for something that has a good solid click feel to it. They're about $4 a piece. We have a Sanwa JLF joystick. This is 4 and 8-way adjustable. On the back here there's a plastic plate that you can lift and rotate. That's 8-way. That's 4-way. For a game like BurgerTime, we're going to want 4-way. We have our USB encoder. And the associative wiring. And this will allow these buttons and joysticks to interface with the Raspberry Pi. It's about $15 shipped. You can get that on Amazon. Pretty sure most encoders are decent enough. Look for something compatible for Raspberry Pi. Speaking of which, we have our Raspberry Pi in case. This is the Pi 3 version B. Came with a power supply. You can get that for about $70 shipped. On the pinouts on the Raspberry Pi, we're going to take a 5-volt source on the on, and we're going to use that to power these 5-volt soft white LEDs. These will mimic the incandescent bulbs that would normally light up the coin slots on the bottom. So we're going to wire those in as well. And finally, we have our 3M adhesive vinyl overlay. So the next step will be to take apart the controller and clean it up best we can and see how this is going to go. Okay, so we've got it laid out on the table, and we're going to go ahead and start taking it apart, starting with the acrylic. So unfortunately, as mentioned, somebody has gone and drilled through this to put these bolts through, which means we might have some holes we might have to patch here. We're going to get rid of this old style joystick. There's really nothing wrong with it, but it's not going to have that solid mechanical feel that we want. That's going to give a real tight gameplay. We're going to use the acrylic that's on this to adapt our new joystick to this. It's a little bit of a hack, but it should work just fine. You can, however, buy fairly standard adapter plates that will adapt almost any joystick to almost any controller. They're available for about $9 plus shipping. Unfortunately, because I live up in Kazakhstan, a $9 steel plate costs about 50 bucks to ship US. And I figure the acrylic will be good enough for this application. And if it's not, we can always upgrade later. Okay, so all the screws are out. I think at this point, we're going to have to pop the buttons off in order to get the acrylic off. This we might keep and clean up because it's quite a bit larger than the one I have on my existing joystick, and we're going to try to mount that right to where it's supposed to go. So now that that mess is dealt with, I should be able to pull off this acrylic. Oh, she's gooped on there good. Oh my. Oh, there we go. That's a mess. And yeah. Good Lord. Well, that's a start. This is where the money's at. Yeah, that's gonna fit just about perfect. Okay, so our next step is to clean up this butchery and decide if we're gonna block these holes or not. But we're going to have to cut holes to match the buttons in here and potentially fill those nasty boys. We'll decide later. We're also going to have to drill holes to match our new joystick here, but we can use flush mount screws and countersink, and we shouldn't see any bulge on that. So a few moments, we'll have this cleaned up and we'll worry about getting that sticker on there. In terms of how we're going to clean this up, paint thinner, acetone, wire brush, take it right down to the bare metal, make sure you wash it, keep it clean, and we should be good to adhere with 3M adhesive on the back. We'll be right back. Okay, we've cleaned up our control board. So I didn't film it because it was a little bit windy outside and I couldn't do the audio, but basically what you're going to need here is some solvents. I used Varsol thinner and brake cleaner and a paint scraper to just work my way from one side to the other with the solvent to get the old adhesive and stuff off. And I made sure after that was done I used brake cleaner to clean it. Make sure you do this outside or a place with good ventilation, and make sure you clean it off after. Make sure you don't have any residue of glue or things after that, because that'll interfere with the adhesion of the next overlay. The next process that I skipped here is just dremeling down the high points. So the previous owner or previous owners at some point had drilled through here, and I just had to deburr the edges where they had drilled holes through so that there would be no high points on the overlay. So now that we've got this all cleaned up, we're going to have to mark out and drill holes for our next joystick controller, because the new one is not the same as the original nor the modification that it came with. And I've got a couple blocks of wood here. Just going to lay this down so that when it comes time I can drill through. And it's kind of hard to see, but we're going to go ahead and place that in place there. Now there's going to be some wiggle room with the joystick placement. You want to sort of have it dead centered from whatever OEM holes were drilled. And I'm going to look underneath to try to just get it perfect. Okay, so I'm good this way. If you want to be real precise, you'll measure. My eyeball's pretty good from years of carpentry. Mostly around the house. Okay, we more or less have it where we want it. I'm going to get some masking tape, adhere it in place, and we'll check from the top. Okay, I found some Gorilla tape. It's not masking tape, but it'll do the job. We're just going to put a strip on either side. And see how that centers up. And make adjustments if required. So as you see, it's got to come towards me a little bit there, and the tape should just add a little bit of movement there. Okay, that looks about dead centered. Just stuck it back on the back. Check my alignment on both sides. Now we're going to have a little bit of room to wiggle because of the slots that are on the joystick. But next step would be to mark the holes we're going to have to drill next. Okay, holes are marked. Move our joystick. And we apply our drill. Now we can mount our joystick. I'm going to make the cables come down to the back because I think that's going to be cleaner when we do the wiring. Take off our marking tape here. Now again, if you don't want to drill your control panel, you can buy adapter plates that will work fine. They're about $9. I did not get one in time. As you can see, that's just self-tapping right in. The same for the other corner. I'm going to leave it a little bit loose so I can get it right in the position I want. And there will be some of the screws sticking out the top. That's fine. I'm going to trim that off and grind it down. Yeah, that was a tough one. So you got to make sure you take out enough meat so that it's not too hard to set the screws. Teeth there. Yeah, see this one? A little too much left. Doesn't want to go, don't force it. You should feel the teeth bite. Okay, so tighten those up. So we have a little bit of movement left in them. And just to get it positioned just right, which I think is right about there. Okay, there you have it. And we're going to use the joystick to position our sticker, which we'll do next. Okay, so you'll no doubt notice that there are now 4 screws sticking out the top of the controller, and we don't want that, so we're going to trim those off using a Dremel. And when you do this, make sure you have yourself a set of CSA approved safety goggles. If you don't have CSA, then Lord help you. But we're going to use just a cut-off disc on a Dremel and a sanding disc to finish that after. Okay, our joystick's mounted and we have our overlay in front of us. Next thing we need to do is mark up the overlay so that we can position the center of the joystick on the joystick. And any straight edge will do, but we happen to have a carpenter's triangle handy. So I'm just going to mark best I can the center. Now I'm noting there's lines on both sides there. Just a lead pencil through the middle, and I'll try to do the same here. Again, I'm using existing lines along the bottom to sort of try to mark that up. See, from that I can come quite a bit over. You want to get this right, because this is what's going to position your overlay initially. So we can see that that's not quite centered. The vertical seems about right. Let's see if we can improve on the horizontal a little bit. And again, I'm following the lines here as a guideline. Make sure you use lead or a pencil so that you don't end up permanently marking it. And quite frankly, I feel like that is pretty well centered. So the next step will be cutting that just enough width to match the center of the joystick. Okay, we've marked the center of our overlay that we want to go over the joystick. The next step is probably the first crucial step. Get yourself a hobby knife or an offal knife. Make sure you've got a sharp blade. Get something underneath this. We have a piece of wood, and we're just going to follow those lines we made around the center. Now this is what's going to slip over the joystick. The next part's going to require a friend so you get the positioning correct. So we have now cut a small hole in the center that will fit over our joystick. Well, we've cut our hole for the joystick and we've taken the overlay and we've placed it on here. We've tried to center it as best we can. And how we can check is we can check the alignment on the sides. Make sure it's even all the way down. You want to make sure this is as straight as you can possibly get it. You can also double check your measurements. About 21.5 there millimeters and about 21.5 there millimeters. So I've taken some masking tape and I've applied it to the side just to sort of hold it in place. The next thing we're going to have to do is cut the holes for the buttons so that we can use the buttons to hold it in place when we start adhering it to the thing. So again, just making sure we have it centered. We will have some wiggle room. Now this is where it gets kind of scary because we're going to start cutting things. So we know roughly where the holes are, and we're just going to make a small incision. And just follow the metal. Now this will be covered by the bezel and the button a little bit, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but try to make it as clean as you can. Now a lot of these overlays will come pre-drilled, and if that's the case for you, then you can save yourself this step. Okay, so that's good. Now we're going to do this one. However, if you're doing a custom overlay, you may not have the holes pre-cut, in which case you will have to mark out and cut all your holes. There we go. Okay, so again, we're just going to check our alignment. Then we're going to install our buttons, remove the microswitches first. Now these are usually held in place by plastic pins. Pull the top one out and the bottom should just come with it. Feed them through. I'm just going to thread it up, not too tight, just tight enough to hold it in place, because we're going to want to make sure we move this overlay exactly where we want it before we tighten these buttons down all the way. There we go. Okay, so there's pretty firmly in there. Flip it over and do a last minute double check on the alignment. Looks good on this side. Looks good on this side. Just going to tighten those down. Flip it over. Check as many times as you need to. See, the button alignment looks about perfect. Player 1, player 2. If anything, I feel like the thing can maybe come over a little bit, but it looks even. Okay. So we're happy with that. We've tightened the buttons down. Next thing we're going to do is start peeling back our adhesive. I'm just going to grab a rag. And give this surface one last wipe. And then we're going to peel this back. And we're going to peel it back to just above here. Okay, because we're going to basically start here, work our way down, peel it back, then do the top. Okay, so deepest apologies. We had a technical difficulty. The camera's battery ran out and I missed quite a bit of this. But basically, to start off where we left off there, peel the tape back, cut the backing about this height, and you want to start working your way forward with that. And just make sure you work out any bubbles. Apply quite a bit of pressure around the sharp edges to make sure that goes through. So I also, unfortunately, because of the battery died, I missed removing the joystick. We removed the joystick and we cut this out so that now we can peel back the rest of that. And at this point, because we've stuck the overlay to the front of this, we don't have to worry about it moving around. We can peel the rest of this off and get it stuck down. And once again, we're going to work from the front back, applying lots of pressure as we go. Making sure you work out any air bubbles. We're just going to keep pulling that backing and working our way. Working our way to the back there. And there's going to be holes in here because unfortunately the previous owner drilled some extra holes, but this backing is strong enough that we're not going to really see them At worst, you'll feel them if you have to press down. But even the OEM backing overlay had holes here, so it's not a big deal to feel those. Anyway, again, we're just slowly pulling that backing off, putting lots of pressure on as we go. Okay. Making sure there's no bubbles. If there's bubbles, just work them out. Lots of pressure. So we got a bit of rust here in the corner. Just going to try to scrape that off best I can. Oh, it's actually just the corner. Okay, good enough. So we're just gonna again finish that last little bit on the edge. Okay, wow, that's great. We have just a little bit more to do. We gotta fold this bad boy over, and to do that, we're just gonna make a crease, apply lots of pressure. Oh, she doesn't want to go, but this part is actually not even seen, so it's not a disaster if we wreck this. And if you worked hard to stick it to the surface on the top, this part should just come. Make sure it's not popping up. I'm going to bend it over using lots of pressure. There we go. Okay. Just gonna, again, lots of pressure. Make sure all the air bubbles are worked out as best you can. Even though this side isn't seen, you want to make sure that's stuck on there real good. Okay. Beautiful. Okay, there she is. Now we need to do a little bit of trimming. I'm going to, well, you know what? Since we missed it last time, I'm going to put the joystick back in. Okay, so we had to remove the joystick to make sure that we put this overlay down properly. And now we're just going to reverse that process and pop it back in. Oh, as it flies away from me there. Okay, so there is a cup for the spring. It goes in first. It'll be a little tricky to get it in there. You can use the joystick itself to help. There we go. There's another cup for the spring that comes down from the top. Again, I'm just going to use this joystick to align. Didn't quite get it right there. Just make sure on the top we're not losing that piece. There we go. But yeah, you should have 2 cups, spring, and a retaining clip. It should be that part first. Spring. Of course, these buttons don't want to let it go in. There we go. Sneak her all the way down there. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to lean that against the wood to hold it in place. And I'm going to pop that clip back on. Takes quite a bit of finger strength. Probably pliers will help, but we're good. Okay. And there you have it. Next thing we want to do is just trim out the players 1 and 2. Just feel for the holes and cut away. These are OEM holes, so they're easy to find. You could do this before you pull the backing off, as I did for the joystick. That was mostly just because I needed to make the joystick have room. And we're just going to trim around there. About disposable blades, don't mind scraping them up. Okay, player 1 is done. Now be careful when you do this. You don't want to scrape the overlay beside what you're cutting. Just work slow. Very slow. Keep your fingers out of the line of fire, which I'm not doing a very good job of, but you know, I am not applying very little force. I'm just sort of inching this along. There we go. Beautiful. Okay. So now we can pop the buttons in. I'm going to align all the switches in one direction because I think that's going to help the wiring. Pop those 2 in first. Flip it around so you can see what I'm doing. Here's the retention rings. There we go. Make sure you don't cross thread. And again, I'm going to try to line them up all the same way. See, my ultimate goal is to place the Raspberry Pi either there or here, probably here, so that I have room for the USB controller, USB encoder, HDMI port out, power connector, all the rest of it. So I have to make sure my wires and joystick sort of lines that way, and I think that's probably going to be the best way to go. Now there are tools to tighten these buttons, and if you get your hands on one, I think they're relatively inexpensive, maybe only 10 or 12 bucks. Okay, pepper 1, pepper 2. Go ahead and pop the Microswitch on that one while we're at it. Easier to do now. And we will, just going to flip that around. They are reversible. Well, not entirely. There we go. Oops. Bottom first, people. There we go. Oops. I've got it upside down. I'm gonna flip the switch around. There we go. Okay, we've got button 1 and button 2 in place. We're gonna put player 1 and player 2 in next, and again, just pop the micro switches out. And we're gonna line them the same way. Okay, perhaps for these two we can have them pointing down so that I don't have to try to wire them backwards. Perfect. Yeah, that'll work nice. Wires will flow this way. So try to plan your wire layout before you do this. And there's lots of guides to that, I'm sure, online. I'm not an expert. Again, this is relatively simple because it's only a couple of buttons, but if you had 10 of these buggers, boy, I tell you, she could get complex. Great. Oh, that looks beautiful. Just one more thing to add to this. Oh, of course, we need to put the guard on first. Got ahead of myself, folks. Uno momento. There we go. Not perfect, but perfect enough for us. That's the restored controller with the overlay in place. It's a thing of beauty. And next we're going to wire our Raspberry Pi. We have our beautiful overlay applied now. We have our buttons installed. And it's, oh god, it's pretty. So the next step is going to be to wire up a Raspberry Pi and our encoder. Flip this over here. So you want to mount your Raspberry Pi where you have space. Make sure you check your arcade machine because there's likely going to be some sort of wood and things like this mounts to. I know from my own that the Raspberry Pi itself will mount perfectly right there. Make sure you have clearance for your USB ports, your HDMI ports, your power ports. Make sure you also can maintain that. Basically make sure you can pull it out and change the SD card and the rest of it. And the SD card's in the back. So right there is pretty much perfect for that. We have our USB encoder, and that will plug in through USB. And we're going to probably put that right about there. Now, the quick connectors on these larger micro switches won't fit what probably comes with your encoder, but we have a quick connector kit and extra wiring and all the things we're going to need to make that work. This is the cable that comes with the joystick, and it's certainly long enough to reach the 5-point connection that it's going to need to do to connect there. And we're going to use a pin connector kit to wire that up. And we're just going to basically measure everything out that we need to do so that it's going to end up being nice and clean. First step is going to be to stick those components down onto the board. And we're again going to use 3M automotive tape because it's just perfect for the task. Here's the bottom of the Raspberry Pi case we have. It's got a few holes for screws if you want to try to screw that in there. We're certainly not going to bother with that. We've got the space, and we're just going to stick it right down there. Same thing with this. We've got the room. We're just going to place that with the 3M tape. So with that, we're going to apply the tape and then stick it in place. Okay, sorry for the brief interruption. We're back, and we were about to place the USB encoder. We're going to go ahead and place this on this side, which should give enough room for the USB cable and all the wire we need to do. We've already put non-conductive double-sided tape on the back of this. And we're going to stick that right there. Again, you're going to want to apply a steady pressure and wiggle that for about 10 seconds. Okay, and there we go. Encoder and Pi installed. Now in terms of button layout, essentially we're going to have button 1, button 2, and player 1, player 2. In your typical Raspberry Pi setup, this will probably be a B, that'll be an A, select and start. But in terms of wiring, button 1, button 2, button 3, button 4, and your 5-way joystick. And we're going to start with our joystick. So this joystick came with a 5-wire pinout. Now there's a couple of different styles of joysticks. Some of them have an independent 2-wire per direction, and some of them have these 5-wire pinouts. And we need to basically connect this 5-wire pinout to this here. Now to do that, we're going to use these micro pin connectors, which should fit perfectly on there. And I'm going to pull up a seat here because this is sort of precise work. But these little micro pin connectors can be bent to the wires and locked in place in here. And the best part is if we get it wrong, we can just flip it upside down. So I'm going to measure a rough amount of wire there. Should be all right. We have our joystick wired in, and what we've gone ahead and done is labeled our buttons. For a Raspberry Pi, we're going to do BA select start, which coincides with 1, 2, 3, 4. This encoder can take up to 12 buttons, but again, we are just going to need 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, the micro switches on these Happ style buttons don't fit the connectors that come with the encoder, so we're making our own. And what we've done is we've started by taking some 24 gauge wire, and we've cut enough lengths for 4 buttons. We have some quick connectors which will fit the micro switches. We have some shrink wrap. We don't have red. Inexplicably, we didn't get red that fits the button, so we've gone with black and blue. And we have some micro connectors and micro connector crimp connectors. That may be the wrong name for them, but that's what I'm calling them. And that will allow us to just build our own cabling for buttons 1 through 4. We have our soldering station set up, and we're going to utilize a small magnifying glass and holding station. That's going to make things easy for us. So as you can see, we've already started. I'm going to continue on by going with the ground on button number 3. Here we have our completed control panel. The overlay is on there just nice. The buttons feel great. Joystick looks good. Our wiring is completed on the back. We have our Raspberry Pi mounted. We have our USB encoder. All the wiring's been run nice and cleanly. We've left the USB cable loose in case you want to plug that into a PC in a later date. But everything is perfectly ready to go, and we've tried it and it works fine. So let's get it on the machine and see how it looks. Well, we're back, and we've completed the control panel and the Raspberry Pi installation. And if you're watching closely, you might notice I've had 3 changes of clothes to this video. That's because it's taken 3 days. So here it is, and the only thing different that you might notice is I've added a couple soft white LEDs for the coin slot light up. But let's pop it in and see how it looks. That looks pretty much perfect. And we've got room underneath to get our cables out, which you can't really see right now. We have options to light up our coin slot here, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to run those right there as you see it. And these just connect to the 5-volt pin out on the Raspberry Pi. So, with that, we've got her done. Thanks for watching. I'm Rollis K from Bitter Old Goons Gaming. When we come back on our next video, we're going to install the screen and the bezel around the screen. And that will conclude the guts of the thing. And in our last video, we'll restore the exterior. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you on the next video.